All right, everybody, welcome to week 3. We're moving right along. So I am going to share my Canvas page with you so we can take a look at where we're at. So here we are again. I sent out an announcement, so you should have that, okay? Just giving you a to-do list for the week and so on. Make sure that you're checking your access to SPSS because we're going to be working on that soon, okay? But we'll get there in a minute, in a few minutes. So I mentioned that we had exercise 1 to do last week. I graded your exercises 1s today, so you should be able to see your grade and any feedback you had. The week 3 module is posted, and then for this week we have our first quiz. So I do want to talk a little bit about that, and so that you know what to expect. And then I have the information for our meeting here today. So there we have it. Let me go ahead and hop over to our modules, and I will take us to the syllabus. Okay, so I just want to point out just a few things about where we are and what is to come. All right, so let me get down to our schedule. All right. Okay, so we are heading into the, trying to highlight the whole thing, won't work. Anyways, scientific literacy, right? That's what we are working on. So, all right. So basically, we're going to be looking at how to read scientific writing. We'll be doing some focus on that, as well as just some of the logistics of reading scientific papers and how scientific papers are formatted. We do have a progress check and an exercise this week. Okay. You'll actually be doing the exercise before the progress check, right? And they're related. The exercise is formulating your hypothesis, and then the progress check is going to be talking about your hypothesis to others in the class on a discussion board. Okay, so we're going to try and get you really pointed in the direction of your research project this week, so you get to kind of move forward with that topic. And then just peeking into next week, so you know what to expect for next week, you'll be gathering references for your assignments. Okay, meaning that you'll start collecting references so that you have some source material for your project that we're working on throughout the week. I'm going to also take this time to remind you that you're going to be coming up with your hypothesis and collecting sources. That doesn't mean that you're married to that topic that you start with. It just means that we want to start thinking of topics and moving in a direction that you are interested. You're not bound to any of this quite yet when we write our introduction, all right? That's when you're going to be bound to it in a couple weeks. You'll want to be a little bit more honed in on your topic at that time, so you still have a week or two to feel it out a little bit, but that's what we're focused on for now, all right? Although I do suggest if you can pick your topic now, pick your topic, right? Okay, so moving away from the syllabus, where is my page at? There we go. Okay, so again, remember to get SPSS downloaded. So you will find that, you'll find it in the very first module, okay? So it says to download the program. You've got your Mac version and your Windows version. Have that in here? No. Okay, so it's just in that first module. Okay, download the program. And then when you open it, so if you have a Mac, download the Mac version. Windows, download the Windows version here. Okay, check what kind of computer you have. I don't know how people make a mistake with that, but they often do, so double check for yourself. And then when you open it, you will put in this key code so that you don't have to pay for it. All right? Okay, okay, so if you're using your own Excel version, that's fine, okay? But later on, we're going to be using SPSS, and you will need to access that specific software of SPSS. So if you have an older one, just download the new one, all right? So that you're not trying to figure out what's going on. Excel's not a big deal, but SPSS is. Okay, so let me just remind you that we're working through these modules every week. You should go in order, okay? They're in order for a reason. Everything you need to complete, any given assignment should be found, anything that you need to complete any assignment will be found in previous material, okay? So last week we went over a few topics. We had an exercise, all right? Everybody did pretty well on that. Let's see, this is last week. We had our Intro to Excel assignment. So we will continue to be using Excel as we go along in class, all right? So that was last week. So let's talk about this week, all right? Scientific literacy is what we're doing this week. So this week, I think is fairly exciting because we're really starting our projects this week. We're really getting into our projects, thinking about what we want our topic to be, what we want our prediction to be. And then we have some info here on our topics about reporting scientific literacy, right? And how to write scientifically. That would be topic 4, okay? Right. So it's sort of about reporting researches for chapters 5 and 6. So I'll go ahead and some of this gets a little bit dry, okay? A lot of what we're talking about here is formatting and how to present scientific writing. But it's also that we can put together a beautiful report at the end of the day. So I'll run through these topics briefly because we have 2 topics for week 1. Which is reporting research, right? How we report research, our research findings, how we do a nice written report. So I'll go through these relatively quickly. And remember, since we have the recorded lectures, this is just me kind of scrolling through and pointing out the major features of the slides so you know where to focus, okay? Okay, so I have the chapters for the book, right? These are related, to make sure that you're taking a look at the book and really consolidating these ideas by looking at the examples that the book gives. Okay, so, all right, so research reports. Okay, research reports. So research reports are how scientists communicate to each other, and it's, how they just communicate with the outside world in a sense, So a research report is very holistic. We don't just explain what we found, we explain the thinking behind our study, how we did it, what we found. So I think there's often a misconception that science is just the presentation of data, and it's really a lot more than just presenting data. It's about expanding our knowledge in a lot of different ways. And we have this tree of knowledge that I love so much because it puts psychology right in the middle of it. Really where it belongs, right? Spanning from, the physical realm, space and time, all the way up to culture and kind of collective human information here. So research reports are really meant to explain what we found housed in these larger ideas, right? How do humans behave? How it's embedded in culture? How it's embedded in the physical world and our biology. So I think this is a pretty neat way to think about it, but research reports are really just about communicating knowledge. Research reports are structured in a certain way. Go on to the next slide. Okay. And it's structured in a way to make it easy to approach a scientific article or report. And we'll talk about this a lot as we go because you'll be making one of these. You'll have a paper that has all of these different sections by the end of this class. So you have a title page, you have an abstract. This one's actually a little bit, not obsolete now, but student papers no longer require an abstract. So that's something we'll kind of talk about as we go. Then you have a title of your paper. And then you have the main body of your paper, all right? So these are the paper sections that you'll be turning in throughout the semester, these 4 and the references. This is what you'll be turning in as 5 different assignments throughout the course. So this lecture serves as an overview of what each of these are. And then we have this beautiful hourglass here. Again, I go over this in great depth in the recorded lecture, but basically we'll talk about this concept throughout the class, that when you're writing a scientific paper, let's say that you're writing a paper on intelligence, right? And you think that intelligence predicts something like happiness. So if you were talking about intelligence and happiness, you would start very broad. So we're going into an hourglass shape description here. When you start writing the report in your introduction, you would start very broad. And you would define happiness, you would define intelligence, and then you would slowly work your way into specific predictions, right? That's where the funnel comes in. So you start very broad with your ideas, and then you funnel into exactly what you're going to do, what your methods are, what your results are. And then once you finish your methods and your results, you widen back up again, and then you say, how are my methods and results important to our understanding of this topic as a whole? So we'll talk about this hourglass design. It's a nice little analogy for what we're doing here. So I'll leave this to you here. The title page. These paper sections, just take a look at what is included in the research report. We have a title page. Titles are important for communicating information about your study. You have abstracts, okay, or these small summaries. I'm just going to go over this real quick. There's summaries that will help reader determine if you should bother reading the paper at all. We always start with reading abstracts, and we're going to be reading some abstracts next week when we collect references. The introduction, you'll be writing an introduction in a couple weeks, but the introduction is just a few pages that literally introduces the topic, okay? It tells the reader what you're going to be writing about. You'll clearly state your hypothesis or prediction in this section, okay? But the introduction is sort of like the foundation for the rest of the paper. You're proving that this paper is worthwhile. You're showing the research that's been done before this paper, and you're showing why your paper, basically you're validating it, that there's a point to doing this because all of this research has come before, okay? Your methods are important, okay? Super important to allow other researchers to replicate what you do. Okay, and considering we're in a research methods class, methods are very important. So what did you do? Did you collect data from a survey, which is what we're doing here? Did you do an experiment? How did you get your sample of individuals? So the method is really just what you did. It's a blueprint for if somebody wanted to complete your study again or reproduce your study, they would need your methods. The results are very cut and dry. It's the most boring section of a paper because it's the statistics, unless you're into statistics, which most of us are not. It's just your statistical analysis. We don't interpret them in the research section. We don't just drop our data here, right? We're going to run some statistical tests, and then we will discuss them in the discussion section. Okay, this is where you explain your findings, explain your limitations of the research, what could be improved on, if your hypothesis was supported or not, any bias that you have, okay, and so on. All right, what's next? All right, oh yeah, bias, that makes sense, right? So we're going to talk about various biases so that you are aware of that. I'll let you take a look at your own time, but, that's generally what we're talking about here with research reports, how to write them, how to structure them. And then we have our other topic for the week. So let me go back to the module section. Okay, this week. Okay, so that was reporting research. Then we have topic 5, which is scientific literacy and paper information. Okay. So kind of an overview of the paper. And again, it's not the most exciting chapter in the world, but it's important. So it has more to do specifically with our papers this semester. So you'll want to make sure that you give this set of slides a really good look through and that you know where the slides are in the future so you can reference some info about our paper. But let me quickly go through this with you. I really won't go very long because some of this is just APA format, and I'll leave that to you on YouTube to take a look at. All right, so just an overview of our paper. Okay, so again, our research paper, has an abstract. We don't have to do abstracts anymore. That's a recent change to APA. So I'll let you know all about that once we really start working on our paper, but you'll have 5 pages, basically. A title page and reference pages. It will be divided into those sections that we just discussed. You'll have 5 to 10 professionally respected, peer-reviewed sources. And realistically, you're much more likely to have 10. Okay, so expect 10. We're going to be doing a lot of writing, and you'll need a lot of sources to back that writing up. So our paper will look something like this. If I can get to it. Okay. All right. So that's our paper in a visual nutshell. So you won't have an abstract page, but the rest of these you'll have a title page, you'll have about roughly 5 pages of your study, and then you'll have a reference page. And then we have how to list sources and APA format. I won't go through that with you right now. Okay. There's a lot of information there for you. Basically, we have from our databases, and I have some info about how to access the databases that where you can get the proper citations. Okay, so let's just kind of skip down to that part. So I have some examples of APA stuff. We're going to go through this in more detail, right? So these are all just how do you format things. And I do have a template for APA that I will be uploading. I just saw it yesterday. My husband's in grad school, and I saw this template that his teachers gave him, and I thought, oh, that's fantastic, right? Okay, so right again, you can get a lot more of this from the recorded lecture. I'm just sort of trying to get the most important stuff here. Okay, so this is a good one. Let me go down to that so that you guys can see it. Okay. Okay, so take this to heart, okay? In scientific writing, you want to avoid referencing yourself. You're not going to say I or me, okay? Unless it's sometimes in psychological research, that's okay, but you have to be really careful. We're not going to do that in this class, just so that you can practice not doing that. It's rarely acceptable, but it is occasionally. But just avoid doing all these things, okay? Avoid self-reference. We all care about your experience, but the majority of scientific writing is not based on your experience. If it is, which occasionally happens in psychology, then you might be able to do that, okay? But it needs to be based on what other scientists have found 99% of the time. So you can be motivated for personal reasons, but you can't write a paper based on your personal belief, okay? In good scientific writing, we don't reference ourselves at all, with very rare exceptions, right? So you could say something like, I collected data from 100 people, but that would be wrong, right? So you would say data was collected from 100 people or 100 participants, right? Leave yourself out of it. It's a good way to leave bias out of your writing when you take yourself out of your own scientific writing. Okay. Then other avoids as well, no contractions, because it's formal writing, it's not casual language. So, it's do not don't, okay? We want to really be able to analyze it and think about it in a scientific way. You don't use casual language like things are interesting or great. You don't use sayings like, he kicked the bucket. I don't know why you would say that in scientific writing, but you wouldn't say that in scientific writing. That's the whole point, okay? So you want to write scientifically. And we'll go into this in more detail. Again, I'm just trying to go through this really fast so you get kind of an idea. If you get an idea of what you're going to learn, then it's easier for your brain to hold on to that information. That's why I do these little summaries. Right. Okay. Literature review is more of an hourglass. Okay. So we've got our literature review starting broad and funneling it down. Okay. So this is at least half of an hourglass. It's a funnel, right? But more structure about how to write a strong scientific paper. And then our search strategy. Okay, how do we find our scholarly papers? We'll talk more about that. Our search strategy is basically looking for only peer-reviewed articles. So in our very first lecture, we talked a little bit about peer-reviewed or published work, right? For science to be published in a scientific journal, it has to be peer-reviewed, which means that other scientists have basically graded it, right? They've gone through to see what the quality of the work is. And it usually confirms that we have higher quality of work than non-peer-reviewed work. So we will be using databases to find only peer-reviewed work. So that's what we have here is, let's see. Go back to the module so I can show you. Oops, I shouldn't have clicked back with that. Oh well. Just close these. So yeah, we've got some information here about accessing databases. So I will go through that with you to show you how to use it. Okay. I opened a new window to avoid doing this, and then I did it anyways. Feel like this is too far. Is it too far? No. Okay. All right, so when you do your references assignment next week, which I will talk about next week, okay, you're going to be using all that information. You don't just want to go to Google and type in what you're interested in. You want to go to one of these databases and where you can find scientific writing. So I have some instructions. Actually, let me go back to that real quick. Okay, so I have some instructions in here where it'll talk about how to access these databases, and I'll have a video that I posted too. So it's not very long. It's really easy to do. Okay, it's very simple, but you just have to do it right, and you have to be able to recognize when you have found a peer-reviewed paper or when you haven't. Okay, or you're going to getting screwed up, okay? You might be familiar with Google Scholar, and there's nothing wrong with Google Scholar, okay? But we do have better sites that we are going to be using. I'll talk about Google Scholar as well, okay, so that you understand it. And then, you can cite using automatic citation tools. So we'll be doing some practice with this next week, but do make sure that you're able to access these databases by then, okay? I have a warning, okay, that automatic citation tools are really great. But I think I even have a slide on it. Yeah, okay. Automatic citation tools are great, but they're not flawless, okay? They do mess up. So you still need to do some things manually and check to make sure that the citation came out correctly. So again, we will be working on our references next week. And make sure you're able to access databases by then in order to do so. All right, so next I'll talk about the assignments for the week. Let's go back to the module. Okay, so the assignments for the week. All right. So I'll talk about each one. The first is our research hypothesis. Okay, you'll be coming up with a research hypothesis, which is hopefully exciting because we're getting into our paper. So I'll walk you through that. Let's go ahead and take a look. Exercise 2, research hypothesis. Okay. So let me rehash. We will be doing a research project, right? You'll be writing a research report, and you'll be doing so by collecting data on other college students, right? So you'll be creating a Google form or survey. A few weeks from now, we're going to send it out to other college students, students in my class, and maybe a few other classes, in our class as well. So you get some data back, all right? So you'll be asking people questions. You want to think about what types of questions you can ask other college students that would interest you for your research report. So I have a few points to remember here when you're creating your research hypothesis. The first is what I just said. You'll be collecting data on college students. So maybe you're really interested in children and how children learn or whatever. Maybe, unfortunately, we can't collect data on children, right? So we do have some restraints. We can only collect data on college students. So whatever your topic of interest is, we just need to make sure that we can apply it to this population of interest, that we can apply it to, to college students. So we will be collecting data in a survey format. We're not able to manipulate anything or run an experiment. So, for example, we couldn't do a study seeing if caffeine impacts academic success because we can't regulate people drinking or not drinking caffeine. You can ask people, right, how much caffeine do you drink? How would you rate your academic success? What's your GPA maybe? But we can't actually manipulate anything. So your hypothesis should be along the lines of, anything that is specific to an experiment where you would, physically have to interact with people, because we will be sticking to surveys only. So only things that you can ask in surveys, right? That's the whole idea. And then I have the research topics document if you're having trouble deciding what to focus on. And then something else to mention is we have a few topics that are off limits for ethical reasons. So you'll be asking these questions to your fellow students, right? Other college students. We don't want to ask things like about suicidal tendency or trauma or abuse, because in psychology, one of our goals is to do no harm to those that we work with. If you dig up trauma, then the ethical procedure would be to refer them to a psychologist or refer them to get help. But we're not going to really have the means to do that here. So we're going to stick to topics that are not quite so heavy. So let me go ahead and show you here. I have under research resources, under this module, I have a link to a document. Let's go back to research modules. Let's see, where is this? I think I had it at the beginning. Yeah, okay. So under research resources, research project topic ideas. Okay. So, so it's just exactly what it sounds, right? It's a list of different topics. So we'll be talking about the exercise, how to complete it, and something to remember is that in any hypothesis, right, we're going to need a predicting variable and an outcome variable, independent and dependent. So we need to state that one thing is predicting another. So there's just a reminder here that you will have two variables, and they'll have an independent and dependent, or predictor and an outcome. So you can use some of these variables, hopefully, to help inspire you. And then I also have a little blurb here. Okay, the topics that are not permitted, okay, because we can't follow up with psychological support, right? Those are the main ones. We don't want to get too deep. We'll also get into, we'll get into it in a few weeks, but, we don't want to force anybody to answer questions. So you could ask some fairly personal questions, but you just need to be aware that people might choose to not answer them. So if you ask people, say, about like sexual behavior, I feel like we often have like dating behavior, promiscuity as topics. You can ask them questions, but you just have to be aware that some people might not feel comfortable answering them. Okay, it's that response bias that you probably learned about in Psych 101. So I have a list of okay topics. It's not an exhaustive list. There are many more topics than this in the field of psychology, but these are just some ideas, right? Things that might predict outcomes. So we can just kind of come up with few. Now you might say like age might predict academic success. Maybe you think older students are more successful academically, right? So you could test that. That could be your prediction. Maybe you think there's some relationship between anxiety and dating behavior, right? Maybe you think that anxiety predicts dating behavior in individuals. Maybe you think that music predicts motivation. Maybe you think listening to music increases motivation for studying, for cleaning, whatever it might be. Sleep is a big variable as well that we often use. But again, you don't need to stick to these topics here. And something that I urge you to do is think about the world around you right now. You know, we're all in this online learning world. You can certainly do a study on online learning. We're in this politically tense time period. You could do something based on political affiliation or activism. So whatever draws you in, right? Whatever you're interested in. So again, there's lots of ideas here. So take a look. It might just inspire you to do something specific. So I have some instructions here as well. Okay, exercise 2, research hypothesis. Let's go back to that. Okay, so some instructions here, right? You're creating a research hypothesis and identifying some variables. You'll also be making a graph. Okay, so you can submit this as Excel, in Excel or a Word document, but you do need to make a graph and a predictive graph at that. So let me go ahead and show you the instructions here. Okay, the instructions. So I can show you how you might do this yourself. So the exercise shouldn't take you too much time to actually execute. More of the time with the exercise will be brainstorming your topic. So if you already have a topic in your head, right? Remember our first project check was you talking about things that you're interested in. And if you already have a topic that you're really passionate about, the work here will be getting into a hypothesis form and labeling everything correctly. So let me go ahead and show you, right? You'll be writing a research hypothesis. Oh, it's still processing. Why are you still processing? This is why you should just download everything, because if you rely on your internet. So let me go ahead and show you. All right, you'll be writing a research hypothesis. You'll identify the independent and dependent variables, and you'll generate a graph predicting the outcome. So should your study be supported, right? So this is where students often get a little perplexed, right? We're going to generate some data for something that we haven't done yet. Okay, so it might sound a little naughty to come up with fake data, but all that we're really doing here is making sure that you have a firm understanding of how you expect your hypothesis to go and how you expect the outcome to be as well. So we're going to practice making graphs again. So let's give it a go. So you'll be generating a research hypothesis that you'll use for your research project. And no time like the present, all right, to think about your topic again. Whatever you use for the exercise, it doesn't mean that you must stick to it, okay? But it's to your benefit to start working towards something that you really want to do for the rest of the semester. So you write out your independent variable, your dependent variable, a few bits of other information. So let's go ahead and get started here, right? So maybe I'll do something like this. Say, okay, exercise 2, all right. So independent variable, dependent variable. All right, start there, okay? And maybe I'll ask for those of you, let's see. Might be able to do an example tailored to one of you students. Okay, so I know one of you want to do psychological disorders with substance abuse, and then like as an increase, what was it, like over the during the pandemic. Okay, so I'm going to start kind of writing out some of what you said, just so I have my own reference here. Okay, in pandemic, right? So when it comes to psychological disorders, let's see. Was it addiction or sleeping disorders? Right. So you can basically ask an initial question. Are you diagnosed with any psychological disorders? Let's say we do that. Yes or no. You can ask people if they suffer symptoms from any psychological disorder. Yes or no. And then you can move into more specifics, right? You can say, do you have a sleep disorder? Do you ever, okay, so that's definitely a predicting variable, it looks like, right? Do you think that psychological disorders predict substance use? Okay, so we could go with that. Okay. All right, great. So I think really what you have here, and this is not a problem, but I think what you have here is 2 independent variables. You think that the pandemic and psychological disorders are going to predict substance abuse. That's what I'm reading in your email. And I can go ahead and just run with this. And even if this isn't exactly what you plan to do, hopefully it can give you some ideas of what you're going to end up doing. So I'll just go ahead and put into the independent variable, do psychological disorders. All right. And we'll go ahead and keep it really simple for now. We'll just do yes and no. And then we'll also put pandemic in here as well. And then I think what we'll probably do more, let's see. You can do something like ask them, like you said, has your substance use increased in the last 11 months due to the pandemic? And then kind of a yes or no. And then you would have substance use here. All right, let's see. Did you have any specifics for substance use that you want to focus in on? See, I'm just reading through her email, or her post, I mean. She hasn't classified as yes or no. She's going to do alcohol and marijuana, 3 narcotics, hallucinogens. Okay, so yeah, I think this is great. So again, this is a really wonderful example because you have just lots of variables in here, right? Because each of these is a variable, right? Alcohol use, yes or no, is a variable. Marijuana use, yes or no, is a variable. So you just have a lot to work with here, which is great. So we'll just kind of make it very simple for now for this assignment. You really just need one predictor and one outcome. But this is really good for just thinking about what you want to do for your survey. So in addition to this, like, do you use substance, yes or no? And then having people opt into these, you could also ask something about how much they're using substances, maybe like a 0 being never, 10 being every day, something to that effect. Okay, and then let's read the rest of this email. So when I was doing the data plot when I did this, but the data was low, like the percentage wise, and so my scatter by doing a bar graph, and then I did this book scatter plot, and I don't think it was enough. Do you think it'd be better to add yes or no for substance use, and then like what type of classification reviews? Okay, so that will come to kind of realize this will take a lot more of these decisions. Once you actually start creating your survey, you'll be sending out, it'll be easier. And because how we ask these questions will dictate how we get to this data, there's lots of ways that you can do it. A lot depends on statistical analysis, which we don't need to worry about much right now because we're going to go over statistics next week. But let's just like psych disorders here so far, yes and no. All right, let's say that we wanted to get average substance use from each group, right? So let's go with this 1 to 10. Just keep it nice and simple. Let's say that those who have psychological disorders had a mean of 8 for substance use, and then those who don't have psychological disorders had something lower, right? Like this. So this is just the hypothetical, right? You could just insert your graph. This would be, sufficient for this right now if you're predicting that those with psychological disorders will have greater substance use, and you can go in and label these. We can sort of go on and on and on, right? Maybe you want, instead of just having yes and no, you want to have like anxiety, depression. You want to have, you can see the differences between multiple groups, right? We can make the graph the very same way, insert a graph, right? And then you're comparing multiple groups. You can do the same thing with substance abuse use as well. You can have different groups comparing means. If you know whatever variables you want, you could also do proportions, right? If you want to take a look at that, those being affected by the pandemic, right? Yes and no. You can look at proportions of people who increase their substance use during that time. So basically, long story short, you have lots and lots of options. And you can keep it as simple, as oh no, I already changed these. You can keep it as simple as those who have diagnosed psychological disorders, those who don't. You predict that the group with the diagnosed disorders will have higher use than others. Any additional questions we can get to, but it just depends on what you want to focus on. And you'll start to hear me say that a lot in the class at this point, because much of what we do is what you want to focus on. So whichever of these variables stick out the most to you that you want to focus on, you have the freedom, right? So if instead of this, you want to say, let's see how else we might want to do this. Let's say I'm trying to figure out how we can work the pandemic question into this, because you can ask this in so many different ways, right? You can ask people, like, are you better off now than you were before the pandemic? Are you worse off now because of the pandemic? That would be very general. But the pandemic could also be, I'm trying to think of other ways we can work this in, because there are plenty of ways that we can. You could ask people if, since the pandemic began, they've started use of alcohol, marijuana, narcotics, hallucinogens, all that, or if it's increased. So if you basically had something like, let's continue with the pandemic, yes or no. No pandemic would probably be something like, has the pandemic affected you negatively? So we can do like yes or no, and then we can have a measure of substance abuse over here. So if the pandemic's affected people negatively, maybe they've taken to substance abuse more than the people who say they have not been affected negatively. So I know this might be giving you more questions and answers in a way, because there's just so much that we can do. But this is really kind of simply what you would need. And then if we're going to think about things in this way, we could call this like a nominal variable, right? Categorical, anything that would be like 1 through 10, we could call this, for using yes and no, it would be nominal. If we're using a 1 through 10 scale, it would be something like ratio. So it all depends on how you want to structure it. And if you do have more specific questions, it's, just let me know, but hopefully it gives you some ideas. Okay. And if everybody else is confused about this, then don't worry about it for right now. Okay, so you'll be doing this. You'll have your independent, dependent variable. You'll create a graph, right? So just keep it simple. Okay, this other student's going a little further because she was a bit confused, but hopefully for her, no going further at this point, really. We have plenty of time to kind of fine tune things as we go with your ideas. Your idea is great, but many students won't have a very clear idea. But I know we've talked about your idea specifically, and you seem very set on this one. So you can start going, as far as you want really with this one. So in addition to this, all right, so I'll go ahead and add a few more things in here. You need your independent and dependent variable, all right? You want to make sure you label, and let me go ahead and clean this up just for the sake of giving everyone an example here. Let's just say we're going to go with psychological disorders, nominal, yes or no, and then we'll do substance abuse, or substance use anyway, on a scale of 1 to 10, okay? And that's a ratio variable. All right. So remember, from our types of data, you want to know what type of data you're working with next week. We will get into statistical analysis overview, in which it becomes very important what type of data you're working with. The type of data that you have is going to dictate what types of tests are able to run. And then you'll want a hypothesis. Hypothesis is a statement that serves as a basis for further investigation, right? So we could write something like psychological, if only I could spell, psychological disorders. Predict higher levels of substance abuse or substance use, okay? Something as simple as this would work, right? So we could have here, this could be about psych disorders, and I'm just labeling this here, but basically what we could have, right, is if we go to work on our chart, we remember how to edit our chart, and we'll go ahead and add some axis titles, that this axis, right, yes or no, has diagnosed psychological disorder. All right. And then we'll add another axis title. And this one will be substance use level. And teeny tiny writing. Okay. All right. So now we have a graph, right, that quickly shows us sort of the prediction that's being made. So we're predicting that those who have psychological disorders will have higher substance use levels, right? So this is nice and simple, okay? This is all you need, right? So you can go further than this if you want, if you have more specific predictions that you want to make. But here you go, right? You can also do a correlation, Okay, so this is all about creating a graph, right? So this is mostly what I'm doing here today. Notice how similar these look, okay? Because we're really just focusing on very basic comparisons, but you can also make a scatter plot. This might be a type of plot you're all familiar with. And when you can make a scatter plot to take a look at relationships as well. So let me go ahead and let's come up with another scatter plot. Let's maybe do something like hours on social media and self-esteem. All right, I use these because this is a relationship that we know to sort of be present. So maybe you predict that hours per day on social media, the higher the hours, maybe the lower the self-esteem. Let's just stick with self-esteem on a 1 to 10 scale. All right, so maybe something like this, right? So I'm just coming up with these numbers, right? And again, usually coming up with data can be a little questionable, but for our purposes here, we're really just focusing on making a graph that, more or less indicates what we predict. So if you think that someone spends a small amount of time on social media, like an hour a day, might have a higher self-esteem score than someone who spends a lot of time who might have lower self-esteem score, right? So that's your prediction. We're not saying that's true, but let's go ahead and insert a graph this way as well. If I go insert the scatter plot, we can put one in this way as well. Then you just want to be sure that you label your axes, right? So this is showing a negative relationship, a downward trend between hours on social media and self-esteem. So again, you would just double click, you edit at the very same way. Let's add axis title right over here. We have ours on social media, right? And then let's add another. Then this one would be self-esteem. Okay, and then bada bing, bada boom, there you go. You have a beautiful graph showing your prediction. You could also write out your hypothesis. Your hypothesis could be more time on social media leads to lower self-esteem. Okay, you could write out the full terms. But keep it nice and simple. We have plenty of time to flesh your hypothesis out in the future. So you want to make sure you don't get bogged down. But this is basically what you will be submitting, right? This is time for you to think about and kind of play with your ideas here. All right. Okay, so then I'd like to talk a little bit more about the other assignments for the week. One is a progress check, discussing your research topic. So you'll complete, go to the progress check 2, okay, discussing your research topics. Okay. So, you'll complete this exercise. Oh, you'll complete the exercise, okay, before you complete the progress check, okay? So exercise first, then progress check. I'm going to basically share this info with the class. You'll share your hypothesis, your independent and dependent variable. You'll let the class know if you're really set on your topic. I'm sorry, did I say I'm going to share this? You're going to share this info with the class, okay? So again, you're going to share your hypothesis, your independent and dependent variable. You'll let the class know if you're really set on your topic or if you're still kind of open to other topics. And then you'll just talk to each other about, everything. Particularly look to see if anybody's gotten something wrong. Try to catch them so that they don't, screw themselves up. And then if somebody does point out something that you've done wrong, you can fix that, okay? Look for confounding variables, a third variable that might be influencing the relationship between the two variables they've mentioned. So for example, if we're saying that psychological disorders predict substance use, you would also want to think about what else might be predicting substance use, right? More than just psychological disorders. Maybe it's your family history, maybe it's your kind of social circles, right? The people around you that are using substances. If you've got that, you're probably more likely to use them yourself. So that's what you'll be doing. You'll just be talking to each other about the contents of the exercise, and your ideas for the exercise and the contents of your exercise. So that's your second progress check. It's a great way to get some feedback from your peers, and it's nice to try and find others who have similar topics to you, because then you might find someone who you can buddy up with for the class and work together with as much as you can for the rest of the class. And then the quiz. I guess I want to spend a few minutes talking about the quiz. Okay, so you got quiz 1. Wait, hold on. Quiz 1? Is that where we're at? Yes, okay, yeah, quiz 1. Right. So, you know, so the quizzes are really always going to be a mixture of multiple choice and short answer. So you have multiple choice questions about the topics on the lectures. Remember that you're not quiz on the contents of our exercises or progress checks, right? The quizzes are to check your knowledge of the content that we've been going over in the slides and in the online lectures. So this will ask you questions like, what is a hypothesis? All right, gives you some examples about hypotheses, talks about general studies, right? Remember in the very first lecture, we talked about the three main types of studies: descriptive, correlation, will and I have right here in my notes. So anyhow, make sure you have a good idea of those main types of studies: variables, what's a confounding variable, randomized assignment. Okay, what is randomized assignment and why do we do it, right? What our aims of a study are, or what is the point of a study? What's the aim of a study? Remember there's differences between aims and hypotheses, right? Aims justify why research should be done, and then a hypothesis is a specific prediction that serves to be tested, right? More examples. I will have you apply some of these things. So giving you, say, an example hypothesis and asking you what the independent and dependent variables are, right? So if I'm saying that one thing causes another, which one is which, right? So whatever we say is causing the other will be our predictor. Okay, so which variable is which of the example variables? All right, some things about our types of data, right? Nominal or, ratio, interval, what's the subject variable, information about code, what it means to have a variable that only has two outcomes, like a binary or dichotomous variable. Right, some other variable stuff, nominal or no interval ratio, right? We talked about those. And then from this week, there will be some questions about the structure of a research report, questions about abstracts, results, introductions, what's the point of each of them, titles, what else do we have here? All sorts of questions, right? A few from this week, right? And then right here's the juicy one, okay? The short answer question. So I'll go ahead and let you know what to expect here. The short answer question you'll be writing out. You might have been able to guess. So you'll be writing out a research hypothesis, right? You'll be writing, so basically you'll be coming up with a hypothesis. You'll be including the null hypothesis. So null hypothesis is basically the inverse prediction of what you've predicted, right? The opposite. The null is the prediction that there will be no difference, that there's not going to be any change in outcome. And that's really just for mathematical testing, if you remember. So I'll have you name your independent and dependent variable that you would plan to test. So sounds a lot like the exercise, right? So that should be easy. So that's really our focus right now, is the basic structure of research, having a prediction, having your variables, writing it all out, like a scientist. So that'll be the short answer. It's 20 questions long. There's multiple choice and one short answer, so 20 questions total. It's worth 25 points. You have an hour to complete it. And the quiz is open now, so you can take it right away if you want. Once you start taking it, you have 1 hour from when you open it, so don't open the quiz if you don't intend to take it at that time, okay? And as you could guess with our online structure here, these, they're open book, open note, open slide if you want. I prefer that you don't, but if you do, you do. There's nothing I can do to stop you anyways. You're at home, so it's all on you. But hopefully you guys are learning all this stuff, and yeah. All right. So that was a lot of info, right? Going over the quiz, going over all the PowerPoint and so on. But we do have our first quiz, this week, so I want to make sure we're feeling good about it. But that's what we have for this week. So if you have any questions about the contents, just let me know, send me messages, and I'm happy to help. So good luck this week.